Welcome to Commander Central, episode 285, and today we're going to be having the EDH equivalent of a parent-teacher conference about cards we've tried in this last year. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, how you doing today?
I'm here. I'm ready to talk EDH, but most importantly, I'm ready to take the red pill, because the Matrix trailer came out this morning.
We didn't discuss this offline, but I coincidentally enough watched it 10 minutes before we started recording as well.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm into it.
I'm so jacked. I like that Keanu is keeping his John Wick look
yes.
with the long hair.
Exactly.
So I'm just ready for these two universes to meld, and that's how the movie's going to end.
Yeah, I'm into it. I had kind of forgotten they were making a new one, and so that kind of fell out of the blue on me, and I was like, oh, all right, yeah, bring me back. I'm into it. I'm going to definitely go see it. So, yeah, that was nice to see this morning here. And Chris is obviously not in the show. He's out with an ear infection, and he was kind of out with that last week, too. We were going to record without him, and then we also had a production delay for the show. So between those two things kind of happening at the same time, Chris being out and then the show getting delayed, it just wound up being easier to just bump the show back and not have one the previous week. So we did miss that week there, and he's still out. He thought he was getting better, and I was at the shop on Tuesday, and he actually left 10 minutes after I got there because he was in pain again with it, and I think he had to go to the doctor yesterday about it. So he's still fighting with that. So it's just gonna be Max and I holding on the fort today.
Yeah, and your co-host, your cat, I can already hear it.
You could just hear it in the background, barely there.
Yep.
No one's home, it's just me, and she's mad that I threw her out of the room and closed the door for recording, so we'll see if she settles down.
That's fair.
Did you play any fun games this week? I know you were online playing a few, Max. I saw you report back that Dramoka did some broken stuff. How are your games?
Yeah, I played a few games on a Friday night. I don't remember if it was this past Friday night or the previous, since we didn't record last week, sorry. It was a lot of fun. Dramoka got to do a lot of fun stuff. God, I don't even remember everything that happened, but I got to play 2 games. Played one with Dramoka and just did Dramoka things, kind of held the table down until my old Gnawbones got copied by other people, and I just got... the advantage was not in my favor anymore.
Sure.
But Old Gnawbone is such a good card. It's so broken. I love it so much.
It's such a ridiculous piece of tech, yeah.
And then played another one with Tuvasa, where I kind of had to battle back, but ended up losing to an army of squirrels from a Chatterfang deck.
Chatterfang's really good.
Yeah, and this was I think it was a budget Chatterfang deck. Listener John Egner was piloting it. It was a lot of fun to play against. He's using all these... I apparently don't know how to read cards because I didn't know Chatterfang made the squirrel when any type of token gets made.
Yes,
so
yeah.
Oh, that's why everybody says this is a really good card. I now understand. So,
Sometimes you just gotta read the card.
Yeah, reading the card helps.
I had a fun playing a game this week, playing against an Atla Palani Nest Tender deck, and I was, just the perfect position. The person dropped Atla Palani, and it came back around to me, and I top decked Cursed Mirror. I'm like, oh, I have the mana for this, and I was able to, drop Cursed Mirror for the turn as a copy of Atla Palani, and it has haste, because that's what Cursed Mirror does. I had mana free to tap Cursed Mirror to make the egg, and I had a sack outlet to sacrifice the egg immediately, and I flipped it over into, I can't remember what dragon it was in the deck, but flipped over, the first creature I hit was a dragon. So I'm like, that was a pretty good Cursed Mirror drop there to wind up getting a free dragon out of the deal, basically. So yeah, Cursed Mirror is a real good card if you're playing red. I would highly recommend it. So that's really the interesting... Oh, you know what? I had one more good game I guess I will briefly mention. Was playing with listener Kyle, who's a patron supporter as well, at our shop this week. And we were playing with a young kid, again, probably 14 years old or so, who was playing a mono-red Tuk-Tuk deck. And wound up, he had a sneak attack out, so I'm kind of prepared. You were thinking, okay, I could get hit for 8 damage or something here, or 10 damage, whatever. So I was aware of that. I was not prepared for him to drop 34 damage worth of dragons or something off sneak attack, and killed me. Just straight up killed me. So yeah, that's a thing you can do. I was not thinking in terms of how much damage you could really put out, but 1 red mana per use, and dragons tend to hit for 5 or 6 or more. So yeah, I got smoked.
Jeez.
But hey, it feels pretty good sometimes losing to a kid like that. And he was delighted that he got to get the win out of that game as well. So it worked out good for everybody.
Nice.
So if you out there in listener land want to tell us about some fun games you played or what's going on in your life, how would you go about doing that?
You can reach out to us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can reach us on Twitter at CMDR Central. Hit us up on Facebook by searching CMDR Central, or head over to YouTube searching CMDR Central. One way or another, we see you, we hear you, and we'll get back to you.
Yes, indeed. And you can also find us at patreon.com/CMDR Central. We have a couple of giveaways that wrapped up. We were going to do them on last week's show, but there wasn't really a last week's show. I guess it was the show that got pushed from the previous week, so we didn't announce those like we had intended, but we got those drawn and figured out now. So the Ultra Pro Chandra Alt Art playmat from War of the Spark, provided generously to us by listener Andrew Nolan, is going to Chantel Bennett on Twitter, who goes by @PokeFox99. So congratulations to them. We've already reached out, and hopefully we will probably even have this in the mail by the time the show goes live.
Congratulations to PokeFox99, but Dana,
yes,
you were supposed to draw my name. I wanted the playmat.
Well, ironically enough, when you did the drawing for the Heroes of Dominaria board game for patron listeners, what was the first name you drew, Max?
It was Andrew Nolan's, the person who provided us the giveaway stuff.
So, Andrew, congratulations. No, we wound up redrawing that. And who was winner, Max?
The winner is Kyle Kohler. So congratulations. We will reach out and get an address or confirm your address and get this out in the mail to you.
Very cool. So speaking of things generously provided by listener Andrew Nolan, we're going to do the same thing again this month. So we have another copy of Heroes of Dominaria, the board game that we will give away to a patron supporter who is a member by the end of September. And we also have an Ultra Pro War of the Spark Nahiri Alt Art playmat instead of Chandra this time. So that we will give away on Twitter to someone who likes or retweets the tweet we will put out when the show goes live about that. So 2 more giveaways this month. Good luck to everyone who supports us and enters, or who supports us any way you can, whether it's listening to the show or just liking or upvoting. We appreciate it, and it means a lot. Max, what are your thoughts so far here briefly on what we've seen from the Innistrad cards?
They exist. I can tell you that much.
So is it just stuff that doesn't appeal to you necessarily yet, or are you just kind of burnt out from so much product, or both?
It's both.
Okay.
I think Shadows over Innistrad block really put a bad taste in my mouth for the plane overall.
Sure.
Because I started playing Magic right as, like, the original Innistrad block was rotating out of Standard. We were moving to Return to Ravnica, so I got, like, the Dark Ascension / Avacyn Restored sets were readily available, but not much of original Innistrad. So I understand why people love this plane. I totally get it, and I feel like if I would have been around during that original time, I would feel differently, but my first really true experience was Shadows block, and that just, I think, soured Innistrad for me, and so I'm hoping Midnight Hunt and whatever the next one is turns that around for me, but so far, like, I don't know, the cards look cool, but nothing really is speaking to me, like, oh, I definitely want to run this, or I definitely need to run that, or I want to build this. So maybe these might just be the 2 sets that I just kind of chill and don't really pay much attention to, and just kind of let it ride and see maybe if something piques my interest once I see it on a table or on a virtual EDH game.
No, I think that's a good point, because I also didn't play during Innistrad. I started roughly the same time you did in Return to Ravnica, but I heard from everybody what an amazing set Innistrad was. So it has this reputation as being this phenomenal thing that, oh, you should have been here to, play that Standard or draft those cards or whatever. So everyone spoke very highly of it, but as well, my first real, live experience with it was also Shadows block, which not only didn't live up to the hype, but was, at least to me, a genuinely disappointing set, or 2 sets technically. So you had this thing that was hyped up that we didn't really get to experience the hype about, or didn't get to experience it really, and then the follow-up was just a letdown. So yeah, I am also kind of tentative about Innistrad in general, unlike a lot of people who just adore it. I've liked what we've seen so far from the cards, but I also think maybe Innistrad just isn't my deal, just in general. I mean, there's some Magic sets I like, or some planes I like better than others, and I think I should like Innistrad, but there's something about it that doesn't, I like monster movie stuff and horror stuff, but it just doesn't click with me for whatever reason. And that's, just maybe a thing that happens sometimes.
Yeah. You said this kind of made me, what you were saying, it made me think about how, going back to, it's hard to revisit MTG sets that obviously aren't printed anymore.
Right.
We can't go back and do an Innistrad draft like we could, like you can if you've never experienced the MCU. You can watch all 26 movies, and, it might be a different experience for the new person versus me who's seen the MCU dozen times over, but you can't do that in Magic. You can't, without, some limitations, MTGO does those random cubes and whatnot, but there is no real way without shelling out so much money to be like, I have a box of Innistrad, let's draft it.
Yeah, there's something to be said for being there on that, pre-release weekend or in those first couple weeks and finding those really cool synergies and discovering what cards work really well together. And, of course, back then 3 blocks and you had more storyline stuff too. So like the storyline of this whole set is unfolding and secrets are being revealed. We don't really get that necessarily as much anymore either. Yeah, you can't replicate that unless you were there at the time. I think we just kind of missed that boat, I guess, and it is what it is.
Yep.
All right. So the main topic here, we've done shows in the past about homework cards where like, okay, I want to try this card and I will report back in X amount of time, let you know how it works. This is kind of a side branch of that, report cards, I guess. We're just going to kind of report in about things we have tested this year. They weren't necessarily homework cards that we talked about on the air, but they're cards that hey, I want to try this out in this deck, and we will kind of report back how it worked. That's not necessarily the specifics of the card might not apply to you, but I'm hoping the principle of the thought process does. It at least gets you thinking about what things might work for your decks, even if you don't have the exact same deck where this card will do the same for you. And then we'll also talk about like new cards we did try this year, what things from Modern Horizons 2 or whatever we played that just jumped out at us as being very effective, particularly ones that aren't obvious. Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, I've got nothing interesting to say about it. It's been exactly as good as I thought it would be, but there's no secrets to be revealed there. So I'm going to try to focus here on cards that maybe didn't get hyped, that I have just on a whim tried out and found to be very effective one way or the other. So we're going to kind of do the 2 different things here, but we'll start first with new cards we tried for ourselves, or at least new cards to our decks that we tried, and talk a little bit about that. Max, is there one particular you want to start with here?
Yeah, so this is so let me get it straight. We're talking about cards that aren't from 2021 that
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, the first one on my list is actually right in front of me as I'm fiddling with a deck. I bought a bunch of copies of Omen of the Seas the last time I bought cards, and this is from Theros Beyond Death. It's 1 and a blue for an enchantment. It has flash. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 2 and then you draw a card, and then you can pay 2 and a blue to sack it to scry 2. I'm trying this in my Tuvasa deck because it's just a nice 2 mana scry 2, draw 2, plus if Tuvasa's out, it draws me a card. So it kind of sets the deck up. It kind of gives me some card selection, which I'm really liking. But where I'm finding it's really succeeding is in my Brago deck. Just being able to flicker it and getting that constant scry 2 draw card churns through my deck really fast the few times I've gotten it out and been able to, loop the blink a couple turns in a row.
Well, and enchantments are tough to remove for your opponents too. Like if you have, not that I want to remove your Muldrifter or anything, but I can. That's every color for the most part has a way to deal with Muldrifter. It's much more difficult to get an enchantment out of the way. And not only does it feel bad to remove something like this, but even if you want to or need to, it's really tough. This is going to probably sit there until you sacrifice it. It's just going to sit there being a pain in the butt, scrying 2 and drawing you a card every turn. Yeah, this would have been an easy one to pass over, number one, because blue has way less Enchantress decks, but the added gas you'd be getting in your Tuvasa deck as well is nice. That's a good card. That's an easy one to miss as a common.
Yeah.
And yeah, good to hear it's doing work.
What about you, Dana?
So I have been running Nemesis Mask in my Glissa the Trader deck for a few years off and on. And I say off and on because I pull it sometimes and retry it again. And Nemesis Mask is a 3-mana equipment that has an equip for 3, and it just says all creatures able to block equipped creature do so. So it's a lure effect, basically, from lure back in original alpha. I'll put it on a death touch creature, swing in, everything has to block it, just put 1 point of damage into each thing and kill 4 or 5 creatures or something. The problem with Nemesis Mask is, yes, you can split up the cost of it, so I can play it on 1 turn and then I don't have to use it for 4 turns later or something until I'm in a position where I want to use it. But people don't like that it's sitting there. So I found, number one, if I play it and don't use it immediately, it tends to get removed because no one wants to have to deal with you swinging in and removing 3 or 4 of their creatures or something, particularly ones that they're keeping back for utility purposes. So people don't like that and they tend to remove it. And yes, I can recur it with Glissa, but then I got to replay it and re-equip it, and then that gets expensive too. So that's why it's came out at different times, because I found just the way people respond to it and interact with it, it just isn't that effective. What I decided to try on a whim is to use some sorcery effects to do the same thing. I guess I could use Lure as an enchantment, but then people can technically remove it mid-swing. Whereas if you use one of the sorcery effects, yeah, it's one and done, but it's much tougher to deal with outside of just removing the whole creature. I'm I'm going to try 1 or 2 of these. And the one I wound up trying was Revenge of the Hunted. So talking about Innistrad block, this is back from Avacyn Restored, and it's 6 mana, 4 green for sorcery. Until end of turn, target creature gets +6/+6 and trample. and all creatures able to block at this turn must do so. And it has a miracle cost too, so if I happen to draw it that turn, it's a single green to cast. But even if I don't, Nemesis Mask is 3 and 3 to use and equip. So, this is 6. It's the same mana cost to do both of those things. And this gets +6/+6. And it gives trample. And people don't really have a chance to respond to it. And I found, I've cast this, I think, 3 times since I've put it in the deck. And it's just worked way better than Nemesis Mask. Despite me thinking the reusable artifact would be more useful, it hasn't been. Nemesis Mask always felt right on the edge of being cut. It was just something that never felt like it was as good at what I wanted to do as I wanted it to be. Revenge of the Hunted has been. I've been able to, hey, Glissa's now suddenly a 9/9 and swinging in, and you have to block with 5 creatures, and I'm going to still kill all 5 of them, and I'm going to carry over that damage because of trample onto you, and you didn't have a chance to respond to it. And I haven't had a chance to do this yet, but at some point I'm going to miracle it for a single green and make whatever creature, at least a 9/9 if not bigger, and then also cast Overwhelming Stampede on top of that or something. So there's added utility there that Nemesis Mask didn't give me as well. So I guess the lesson I took away from here was, yes, it seems like a good idea to have the ability to reuse a thing multiple times, and again, it's a Glissa deck, so I assume I want artifacts. That just wasn't the case here. The single one-shot sorcery in multiple ways wound up being much better than the quote-unquote reusable artifact that should be better in this deck. So that was a change here. So this is probably one of the examples of things I'm talking about that probably aren't specifically important to you. Unless you have a Death Touch deck, you're probably not running Revenge of the Hunted or Nemesis Mask. But on a more general sense, it just made me then reevaluate some other cards in other decks that I was this should be good in here, so I'm going to continue to belligerently run it because it seems like it should be good, even though it hasn't been performing, and look for other things that might do that effect better that, according to the general consensus should be inferior cards. Just, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes how people react to things or how decks play out change what is good in those decks. So this is an example of that.
That totally makes sense in Glissa. Wow, that card I bet does so much work. I mean, it's a bulk rare. Good for you.
Yeah, it costs next to, it's a foil deck, so when I was testing it, I just straight up bought the foil because it was 70 cents versus, 15, whatever. Yeah, really happy with that one so far, to the point where I'm also considering trying 1 or 2 more of those sorcery style lure effects that have been printed over the years, just to have a couple more options in there. Whereas Nemesis Mask always felt like, this is the one, and it's the only one of those I wanted because it was so mediocre. This makes me want to run more.
Nice.
What else do you have here, Max, for older things you've tried out this year?
So I'm going to report on a card that I have taken out of all my decks that I was trying, and now it is no longer in my decks. And that is Court of Grace. This was the white court from the Commander Legends cycle. So at your upkeep, you make a 1/1 spirit with flying, or if you're the Monarch, you make the 4/4 angel with flying instead. I've had 0 good luck with this card since I put it in almost every single one of my decks when Commander Legends came out. Either the Monarch gets taken from me right away, and then the 1/1 dies, or I make 2 4/4 angels, and then people wipe my board and kill all my enchantments. I feel like it put a target on my back, even though I didn't suspect it would.
I am with you there, in not just Court of Grace in general, with all those courts from that cycle. I don't think any of them are bad, but I was relatively hyped on a couple of them, Court of Grace, Court of Bounty in particular, and they've been fine, but none of them have been amazing, I don't think. And I thought they were, I'll say this, I thought they were going to be better than they have been, at least in my experience with them.
Yeah, that is definitely how I feel. I feel like I overhyped these cards personally in my mind, and dang, I feel really bad about it because I was really hoping these would be good cards for me personally.
What I have found I don't like is I really don't like unpredictability and uncontrollability. And yes, there's all kinds of chaos in Magic games. You can't control everything. But the thing with that particular Monarch effect is you find yourself in situations where you think you're going to play the Monarch and hold it for a couple turns, and something happens that changes that, and you put yourself in a position where you can't get it back then. It's I played this thing, and they wound up giving somebody else now the ability to draw cards for 3 or 4 turns. I don't like not knowing when it's going to happen. So, like, I know, again, not everything can be controlled, but it just feels bad to me when I think I know what's going to happen in the situation and I wind up helping somebody else and kind of hurting myself by playing an enchantment that does next to nothing. That just winds up frustrating me, and maybe it does in other people, but I don't love that aspect of that gameplay. So, I hear you. I have an odd one here. This is a card that I don't even remember ever talking about back when it came out in Kaladesh block, and that's Reverse Engineer.
Card is so good.
Yeah, I don't know. I think because it's in blue, I guess, and I just didn't have an artifact deck in blue that cared about stuff. So for those who don't know, it's 3 blue for a sorcery with Improvise. So artifacts that you tap can help pay for the cost. So basically it's draw 3 cards for 5 mana, but you can draw 3 cards for 2 blue mana, which is amazing. You know, drawing 3 for 5 at sorcery speed is bad. Drawing 3 for 2 at sorcery speed is amazing. So the problem with it, I think why I maybe overlooked it initially, was because it takes a certain kind of deck for you to have just spare artifacts lying around in play that aren't being used for something. Looking at my Veil of the Nightclad deck, it's an artifact deck, but like it's an artifact creature deck, and the creatures are either being held back to block, or they're being used to attack, or they're mana rocks, or they're doing things that like have them being tapped more often than not. You know, mana rocks are useless for this. Yes, I could tap a mana rock to improvise, but like I could just use it for mana too, right? It doesn't do you any good necessarily there. What you want is to have a certain amount of artifacts in your deck that you can tap that don't serve any other purpose to reduce its cost, but it doesn't cost you anything, kind of. And if this was instant speed, that would be much better, because then you could just, before end of turn, any creatures you had back as blockers, tap them all, who cares, and then draw your cards and move on. But it's a sorcery, so you can't do that. But that's not true of every deck. Like, there's those Brea decks out there that have a ton of Thopter tokens in play regularly. Like, you can afford to tap a couple of Thopters. And where I found it to be really effective is in my Essior and Arden equipment deck, because I can tap equipment all day long. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if my Sword of Fire and Ice is tapped or Mask of Memory is tapped. It tapped or untapped, it's the same thing in terms of how it functions. And there's, 18 pieces of equipment in that deck. There's just always ways for me to draw 3 cards for 2 mana. And I think it's a card that doesn't see a ton of play, and I think people should look at it a little bit more. I think there's plenty of corner case decks out there where that is a super efficient draw spell. If I could run 4 copies in that SUR deck, I would run 4 copies. It's just always a 2 mana draw 3. That's amazing.
Yeah, I need to put this in Sai, because I have all those, like you said, Thopters that just sit there, and dang, I need more draw in that deck anyways, so thank you for putting this on my radar.
And if you make, like that deck, if you're making multiple Thopters, okay, you'll leave one untapped as a blocker, or 2 even, but like if you've made 4 that turn or something, and have a couple free, you're like, it's much easier to tap them than it is maybe in my Vela deck, where I have less creatures, but they're all kind of big bodies that I don't want to be wasting by just tapping them to draw a couple cards. In that deck, it's much easier to. In a Brea deck, it's much easier to, that kind of thing. All right, Max, what else do you have here for ones you tested out this year?
So my last one for this category is Charming Prince. This was a rare out of Throne of Eldraine. So 1 and a white for a 2/2 creature, and when it enters the battlefield, you have 3 options. You can scry 2, you can gain 3 life, or you can exile another target creature you own and return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. I put this in Brago for a couple reasons. Similar to Omen of the Seas, that scry tends to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
It also gains me life, which that deck sometimes needs, because I don't have much lifelink in that deck. I do have, like, Cloudblazer, which, gains me life on enter ETB and whatnot, and I think I have a Sphinx's Revelation. But just, that could be nice. But the fact that it can also, if I do my Brago shenanigans, I bring them all back, and then Charming Prince can hit that Muldrifter one more time.
Right.
Just for that little bit of extra value going into my end step. It's good. It's not going to win games in the sense that it's going to deal 40 damage on its own to 3 players, but the value, having the modular value options on this card, I think is what's going to put it above and beyond the more I get to play with it.
Nice. Yeah, having things that have modes where you use them regularly, like always having that choice and having them always be useful is a big deal. So yeah, I can see that making sense there for sure. My last one here is a card from back in Alara block that I've kind of tried over the years and never really been able to make it work as consistently as I wanted. That's Vanish into Memory. It's 2 white-blue, 4 total for an instant. Exile target creature, and you draw cards equal to that creature's power. And at the beginning of your next upkeep, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you do, discard cards equal to its toughness. So I've tried this before, primarily in my Isperia deck, and there's times when it does something really, really good. I've never got to hit a Meryl Age token with it, but like that's kind of the dream, right? You hit a token, draw 20 cards, hit a token coming towards you. Don't take the damage because you exile it with Vanish into Memory. Draw 20 cards, and because it's a token, it never comes back into play, so you don't have to discard anything. I've never gotten to do that, but like that was always kind of the dream, but there's also situations where someone just comes at you with like a Ball Lightning or whatever, or if they come at you with a generous gift token. Okay, who cares? You're spending 4 mana to not take 3 damage, draw 3 cards, and then it's a token, so it goes away, you don't have to discard anything. But there's also situations where like, oh, this person's coming at me with this 5/8, okay, I guess I could not take 5 damage and draw 5 cards and then discard 8 when it comes back into play. That doesn't feel particularly good. Or even if it's a 5/5, okay, draw 5, discard 5, that's not terrible. You're filtering probably, you're swapping your 5 worst cards in your hand for your 5 best cards, and you're not taking damage. But that never felt that impactful, particularly leaving up 4 mana to do it. It was fine. There were games that was really good. There were games that didn't feel great. So it's a neat, interesting card that I've always had an eye on, but never found a home for it. Well, I built my Ardenn and Essior deck this year, and at some point got thinking and decided to put Vanish into Memory in that deck again. And the reason is, the problem with Vanish into Memory is those situations where there isn't a big token out, or there isn't an obvious target of an opponent you want to hit. In this deck, where I have a commander that frequently is a 10-10 or a 12-12 or a 14-14 or whatever because it's wearing 4 pieces of equipment, that's a pretty good target for me to blink out and draw a bunch of cards if there isn't something defensive to do with it. Now, normally you wouldn't want to do that because then all that equipment falls off when it gets blinked out. Except for my other commander is Ardenn, who reattaches equipment for free on my combat step. So it gives me the ability to, if I don't have a juicy target of somebody else's, I just hit my own commander, draw 10 or 12 cards, it comes back into play, it's a 1/3, I discard 3, who cares? It's basically great or good at that point then. And then I can just re-equip the equipment onto, not onto Essior, I guess, because Essior at that point has summoning sections, but onto something else, onto Ardenn, say, even, and swing back in again. Like, I'm not really out anything using it on my commander. It winds up being a crazy good draw spell without much downside, and I also have the ability to hit that Meryl Age token, or hit that living weapon piece of equipment that's going to draw me 6 cards or something off a Nettle Sister or whatever and cost me nothing when it comes back into play. So it's a cool card, and I think people should look at it more, but really look if you might find yourself in a deck where you've solved the problem I had, where you've fixed it being dead some 30% of the time or whatever it is, because you can use it on your own thing and really get good value as well.
I'm so happy you have made this card work. I've seen this card, I have this card, but I've never made it work for myself. But seeing that you do it to your own stuff when it has equipment on it, and then it all falls off, that's super cool. Have you ever ran into times where you don't really have a good target on your opponent's end and you want to use it on your stuff, but let's say they have one of the swords that gives it pro-white or pro-blue? Has that ever been an issue?
I haven't hit that yet, but yes, that could technically be a thing because I also have a commander's plate in there. Yeah, that could be an issue. I'm not running Lightning Greaves specifically because that can cause problems with equipment in general. So I don't have Greaves in here, but yeah, that I have not hit that yet, but that could be a thing, and that's something to watch out for in an equipment deck running swords because I have the swords that do give pro-white and pro-blue. So yeah, that's something that could technically come up, even though it hasn't yet.
Interesting.
All right, Max. So those are cards that we kind of homeworked ourselves this year. We didn't talk about them before we tried them, but those are ones we did test out. But let's talk a little bit now about like new cards. So like every time a set comes out, you buy a couple singles and put them in decks, and sometimes they stay in those decks, sometimes they come out. Let's talk about a few of those, I think, here, the cards that we tested out this year and wound up either liking or maybe even, I picked ones I liked. Maybe you picked out ones that they were disappointing to you. So what do you have to start with here?
So I chose cards from 3 decks. So I'll start with Dromoka and the cards I've added to that deck.
Okay.
And the first one is Redain, God of the Worthy, and then the backside is Volkmira, Protector's Shield. Redain has been awesome in this deck. Redain is a 2 and a white, 2/3 flyer with vigilance. It says snow lands my opponent's control enter tapped, and non-creature spells my opponent's cast with converted mana cost 4 or greater cost 2 more to cast. The reverse side, the shield, is an artifact for 3 and a white. If a source an opponent controls would deal damage to me or a permanent I control, I prevent 1 damage of it. And then whenever myself or another permanent I control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. In playing the deck, I have never cast the shield in Dromoka. Mainly because I think slowing down, making a Wrath of God cost 6 versus 4 is a lot more impactful than giving myself and all my stuff ward 1, essentially. Right. And I think that's probably the meta we play in more than anything. You know, we like to play big, long games, 10, 12, 13 turn games. We're not trying to win on turn 6. If that was the case, then I think I would probably be casting the shield a lot more. But the fact that this is just a 3 mana, 2/3 flyer, it helps my curve in the deck. I haven't ran into the issue with the Snowlands yet. I'm just lucky none of the players I played against are running Snowlands in their multicolored decks. But it definitely has that second clause of the 2 additional mana has hosed lots of people, you forget it's there, and it screws up turns. It screws up people's turns because they want to do this one thing and then wrath the board or vice versa, and they can't do one or the other.
Yeah, so the note I have about playing against this card on your side is it's an annoyance, but it's an annoyance that you don't necessarily want to remove. There's 2 different games I think I've played against this card when you've had it out. And at least one of them, if not both of them, I had an answer in hand. And I was still like, oh, this is frustrating, but it's not losing me the game yet. And I don't want to blow this, whatever it was, Pondify or something, because I know something much more terrifying. Like if someone drops an Avenger of Zendikar or something, I have to deal with that. Like this, I can kind of play around a little bit. So you wind up inconveniencing yourself and everyone else too. That's the other factor of it. It affects everybody. I mean, this not to you, but like affects my other 2 opponents as well. So I'm like, okay, I can play around this. Is it hurting them more than it's hurting me? Maybe. Like it just winds up being something that at least for me, I could never justify removing even when I had a chance to do so, despite the fact that it was screwing up my plans. And that's a really good sweet spot to be in for a card, I think.
Yeah, I have definitely not heard any disgruntled players that card is really ruining things for me. I think the card that I was running instead of this was Angel of Jubilation, and that caused way more problems during games than this, I think, ever will.
Yeah, good call. I like this card. I've got a comment here for Modern Horizons 2 that I put in a deck because I didn't have... So I wound up cracking, I think, 3 Ragavans. I had 2 in my pre-release kit. The one was the promo, and then I cracked one in a pack, and then I got another one in my prize packs. So I had 3 of them to start with, but Chris being a Modern player, I swapped him to Chris for a few things just because they were so expensive and he plays Modern and he needed 4 for a deck. So I got rid of all 3 Rugavans I had. And okay, well, I wanted something for my treasure deck that was a low CMC creature. So I grabbed Impulsive Pilferer, because it's also 1 mana, and it says whenever it dies, create a treasure token. I'm like, okay, I've got sacrifice stuff in that deck anyway. That seems decent. And it has Encore for 3 and a red, and Encore lets you make 3 token copies that have to attack. Well, same thing. When those die, I make a treasure token. So I'm like, oh, this seems like a fine replacement for Ragavan unless I decide to get one eventually. Well, on a whim, I bought a pack actually last week at the shop of Modern Horizons 2 and cracked another Ragavan. So I actually have the one I had thought of putting in the deck and put this in its slot, but I didn't take on Impulsive Pilferer. This card's fantastic. So it stayed in the deck because it's just so good. Now, maybe it isn't in every deck, but it comes into play. It's 1 mana. If you have any kind of a sack outlet, it functionally replaces at least the mana cost you spent on it making you a treasure, which you can then sacrifice, and there's things that care about that as well. It matters very much in my Jury deck, where if I sacrifice this, Jury gets a counter. It gives me a treasure that I can sacrifice to put another counter on Jury. Then I Encore it back into place, and that's 3 more treasure it's going to make that I'm going to give 3 more counters, and those creatures get sacrificed at the end of turn. So this is potentially, when I Encore it, 6 more counters onto Jury in addition to making 3 mana. Now, not everyone's playing a Jury treasure deck like me, but like if you are playing a deck that has red that cares about sacrificing stuff or just needs fodder, a 1/1 for 1 mana that's easily skull clampable, that's going to give you a mana back and then let you make more copies of it that you can then again skull clamp and get more mana or more treasures out of them, or more tokens even. Like let's say you're playing a Brea deck and you just care about having artifact stuff into play. Like you want to just have a bunch of artifacts out for whatever crazy stuff Brea is doing. Like this makes you a bunch of artifacts while giving you bodies to sacrifice to stuff. It's a fantastic card for a common that costs a nickel or something. It's like 40 cents. It's not that inexpensive, but like it costs next to nothing and it's got so much utility. This card is really good for a common. It's really good. Like if this was a rare and cost $4 or something, I would not feel bad having spent $4 on it or $5 on it to put it into a deck. It's performed at that level. Like the last time I think I used it, I dropped it, didn't even bother hitting somebody with it. I immediately sacrificed it to like a, whatever it was, high market or something. The next turn, I drew a skull clamp and I had enough mana to encore it back and skull clamp all 3 versions of it. All 3 tokens. And so drew 6 cards and put 6 counters on Jury. That's insane. It's such a useful card. So this is one of the ones from this year that I think I doubt many people even talked about in their set review because it's a common. And it's super, super good.
That's gross. Yeah, that card is bonkers in that Jury deck, and hopefully it stays there forever because it's not going to take it out.
I just can't imagine finding something like, okay, this is going to be better. Finding enough things, or there's just other creatures I would remove first. This is fantastic. So, how about you, Max? What do you got for a fun one from this year you've tried?
The next one on my list is Valkyrie Harbinger, again from Kaldheim. This is a 6 mana angel. It's a 4/5 with flying and lifelink, but it has this awesome clause, and it's only taken me... How many years have we been playing Magic, Dana? Quite a few? Since Innistrad block. Yeah. So, 10 plus maybe. I'm finally listening to you when you say, hey, you should run cards that have these at the beginning of each end step. If you gained X or more life this turn, create X token. And that's what Valkyrie Harbinger does. At the beginning of each end step, if I gain 4 or more life this turn, make a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance. And when your Dragon Lord Jamoka deck has a bunch of flying lifelinkers, you tend to make a lot of angels to the point where I think I had it out in a game with you a couple weeks ago, and the entire table said that needs to go. Not anything else, that needs to go. I was offended.
I mean, just by Dramoka attacking, you get a free 4/4 angel every turn.
Attacking or blocking, it's so
right.
Good. Oh.
And this is a 4/5 flyer with lifelink all on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, it's not a bulk rare card, but it's $3 or $4 looking at the price right now. And I'm looking at the price. I'm not just guessing and being wrong like I often am. Based on information from 2017. I actually looked this one up. But yeah, really, really good card. And yes, has to be dealt with or it's a problem. Speaking of things that need to get dealt with or they're a problem, Nettle Cyst, also from Modern Horizons 2. 3 mana for a living weapon, so it comes into play attached to a 0/0 Phyrexian germ creature token. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. And it's 2 to equip onto something, but like even if you just drop like in an artifact deck again, which is probably where you're running this, you just drop it for 3 mana and it's just magically this, 7/7 creature or 8/8 creature or much larger than that sometimes in the right deck. And it can swing all on its own, or you can equip it to something and swing in with that because 2 is a pretty cheap equip cost unless you have, if you have a Pure Steel Paladin or an Arden or something, you can equip it for nothing. And when you do so, that germ is going to die, which can generate a death trigger. I think a couple games ago, I guess it wasn't the last one I played with this in a deck, but I skull clamped it right before I equipped it to something else. So like it was in my Arden and Essior deck, and I put the skull clamp on the Nettle Cyst, I cast it, skull clamped it, moved to combat, and equipped it onto Essior for the swing, and drew 2 cards because the 0/0 germ creature token died as soon as the equipment came off it. There's just so much utility in this thing. I currently have it it's in 3 different decks of mine right now. It's in my Vela deck, I've got it in my Arden and Essior deck, and I've got it in my Jury deck because there's so many. That's a treasure deck, so there's oftentimes just a dozen artifacts lying around, and I can just equip it onto Jury to do that much more damage when Jury dies. So I'm running this thing in 3 different decks right now. It's a super, super good card, and I thought it looked useful when it was spoiled, and it's just been that much better in actual practice.
Damn, I have not seen this cast yet, so knowing it's in 3 of your decks, I'm probably going to see it soon.
Yes, yeah, for sure. What do you have for me, Max?
My next one is also from Modern Horizons. We're going to talk about Sanctum Weaver. This is the 1 in a green enchantment creature that is a 0/2, but you can tap it to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments you control. Because everybody needs a second copy of Serra's Sanctum. I finally got to cast this the other night when I was playing on a Friday night. I don't know if my board state was scary or I wasn't the scariest person, but it got to sit around for a while, and I got to tap it for mana. Not a lot, maybe like 6 or 7 every turn. Okay, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
But it's just, I knew it was gonna be good. I didn't understand how good it would be, because, like, the fact that it's any color
Yes.
blows my mind. So it's like, oh, I needed white, so, like, I tapped it for 7 white and to be able to cast, like, a Sphere Safety and something else.
Yep.
But, like, hey, I need 7 mana to cast maybe a Nylea's Colossus. Well, there it is, you know? It's just bonkers. That's what my notes say, is bonkers. That's all I wrote. It's a bonkers card.
So here's how good this card is. If this didn't say mana of any one color, if it just said it had to be green mana or even colorless,
It'd still be good.
It would be good. And if it wasn't an enchantment creature. So part of the beauty of this is it counts itself because it's an enchantment creature. So it always taps for 1 as long as it exists. If it wasn't an enchantment creature, and if it didn't let you make mana of any color, it would still be really good. And I would still run it in an Enchantress deck for sure. But the fact that it always taps for a mana, counts itself, and lets you make whatever color you need the most, 2 really useful little things on it, makes it just that much better. Yeah, same thing, Max. Like, I knew it was going to be good, but I was kind of, I think, thinking in terms of Serra's Sanctum, where if you don't have any enchantments in place, Serra's Sanctum doesn't do anything for you. This always does. This always taps for at least 1, and the reality is it usually taps for 6, which you then downplay because it sometimes taps for 15, right?
Right.
So, like,
yeah.
You know, we say it didn't make that much because it was 6, but that only seems like not that much because sometimes it makes, 20. Yeah, crazy good card. It's, again, looking at the price, so I'm not wrong here. You can get it for just over $2. Like, that's really good for this. And it's not, when someone goes to build an enchantment deck in 2 years, it's not going to be $2. So,
I mean, there's like 6 different versions of it.
That's true.
So, I mean,
all from the same set. Yeah, that's true.
So it'll be like $10.
Yeah, there we go. My next one will be from Strixhaven, and we've had a real embarrassment of riches in the last couple of years in terms of black targeted removal. And you very much have Deadly Rollick as one that jumps out because it's free to cast if you control your commander in black. So just 0 mana to exile a thing, which is crazy good. And it makes it easy to overlook how really useful Baleful Mastery is. Baleful Mastery is an instant for 3 and a black, exile target creature or planeswalker. So it's, Hero's Downfall asks you can hit both for 4 mana, and that's not terrible. Hero's Downfall is 3, and it's double black. This is only single black. And it's a destroy, whereas this is an exile. So, like, this is relatively comparable to Hero's Downfall, just without the extra line of text on here that says you can pay 1 to black rather than pay its mana cost, and if you do, an opponent draws a card. So you can cast this then for just 2 mana to exile a creature or a planeswalker and give an opponent a card. And I don't love giving my opponents things, but what I've found in playing this is it just doesn't matter. You're never casting this on turn 1 or 2 or 3, for the most part, at least I never have so far, when the card I'm going to give to somebody might wind up being the card going to the person who's going to blow up next turn and pull, ahead in the game. I'm casting on turn like 6 or 7 or 8 when I'm trying to solve a problem, and you don't have to give the card to the person whose thing you're removing. It just says give a card to an opponent, or an opponent draws a card, I should say. There's an obvious target, at least I found that's the case, every time that you can give a card to either try to make a friend, or because they're just not a threat. They're so far behind, or what's happened at least one time in a game is I was going to kill the person. I knew exactly who I was going to remove on my turn, and okay, I'm going to Baleful Mastery this thing that's a problem on your turn, give the card to the other player who I'm going to immediately kill. And it becomes irrelevant then too. The giving the card away, I found very, very infrequently matters. And if it does, paying 4 mana for that is still pretty decent. So this is a card I have loved. I think it's gotten overshadowed a little bit because Deadly Rollick is so crazy, but it's really good. And I would recommend if you are either trying to use it as a budget version of Deadly Rollick, or if you have room for both, I would definitely pick this up because it's again, $2-ish card right now. And I could see it being, 3 or 4 down the road here because it's that useful. All right, Max, back to you. What do you got?
My next one is going to be from Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. And I know when you and I did that set review, we were pretty hyped on all of these cards. Mm-hmm. but I'm going to talk about Wizard class. This is a 1 blue enchantment for the class. Its starting phase is you have no maximum hand size. You can level it up for 2 in a blue to make it, when it becomes level 2, you draw 2 cards. You can pay 4 in a blue to put it at level 3, and whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. I put this in my Tuvasa deck.
Okay.
Just because it's a 1 mana enchantment, and this deck likes everything as low to the ground, curve-wise as possible. It's another way for me to have no maximum hand size on top of the only Reliquary Tower in the deck.
Right.
Since there's no artifacts, I'm not running like a Thought Vessel along with that. Typically, I run Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower are 2 ways to make sure I have no maximum hand size if needed. I have yet to be able to level it up, but I have cast it, and it is, it just sits there. Nobody's going to remove it.
Right, yeah.
Until, I'm sure they will care about it when I put it at level 3 and I'm drawing 4 cards a cast of an enchantment or something. But I'm super impressed. This is actually one of the only classes I'm running. I think I'm running Cleric class in Regna and Krav. I just haven't played it yet. And I bought a bunch of them, but the more I looked at my decks when tweaking, they're like, this is pretty specific. I have to be doing this one very specific thing to make the class work. So I just decided not to run them.
Yeah, this is one that I liked a lot too. And I think I put it in my Talran deck, and I have not seen it yet. So it's one of those cards that's been a victim of me just not drawing it so far. But I like this one a lot, and I'm really looking forward to playing it because there's definitely going to be situations where you get it up to level 3, and the next turn you have the ability to just draw 5 cards or something. And it's also not one that says, after the first card per turn. So worst case at level 3, you're still putting a counter on something during your upkeep every time. Just from your draw spell. You're not upkeep during your draw phase, let alone, that brainstorm you cast or whatever. Yeah, I have not got to play it yet, and I don't know if I've ever seen anyone play it yet, but this is one I'm really looking forward to trying because I like this card a lot. My next one is one that was a real kind of pleasant surprise for me, and that's Tavash Gloom Summoner from back in the Commander 2021 decks, I believe is where Tavash was, which would have been the Strixhaven decks. Tavash is 4 in a black for Human Warlock with lifelink, and it's a 4/4. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, you can pay X life, where X is the amount of life you gained this turn. And if you do, create an XX black demon creature token with flying. So I put this in my Veto deck because it's a life gain deck, and I'm like, okay, I needed a few more bodies in there anyway. I wasn't really happy with the amount I had. So I'm like, okay, well, this is one I can use the life I'm gaining for a resource, and it has a lifelink, so it's going to proc damage with Veto. It's just so much better than I had thought, to the point where I'm actually considering converting that Veto deck to a Tavash deck.
Really?
Yeah, and the decks will play differently, but there's other reasons for that. Part of it is when I sit down on the Veto, people tend to immediately assume it's the Veto combo deck. And when I explain it's not, everyone believes me, but I would just rather not have to deal with that. Whereas Tavash, I've never even seen it before in a deck, let alone as a commander. So I kind of like that idea. I think I can build the same or very similar deck without having to deal with people assuming it's going to be Veto combo. So I'm messing around with converting the deck right now. But beyond that, there's just almost always somebody, worst case scenario, all on its own, there's almost always somebody you can safely swing into with a 4/4, which is going to gain you 4, which is going to let you make a 4/4 demon with flying. And that's just on Tavash himself, because he has lifelink, and that's going to gain you the life, or whatever, block with it, whatever. It's just really easy to make a 4/4 demon every turn, and that's without running other things that let you gain way more life to make a 12/12 demon or a 20/20 demon or whatever. In that Veto deck, the 2 times I've had it out, I've been able to make demons that required larger than a 20-sided dice on more than one occasion. Wow. So I've had to put a token down and use a 20-sided dice and something else to represent their strength based on how much life I gained that turn. It's just a really, really good card, and to the point where I'm going to very seriously look at converting that deck over to Tavash. But if you care about making tokens, or your deck incidentally gains life this is just a really solid card that is seeing very little play. It costs, the fancy borderless version of it is 50 cents, it looks like. So it's just a card that's not seeing much play at all, and I have been really happy with it.
That's awesome. I remember being kind of hyped on that when we did the set review for the Strixhaven. And
then they forgot about it. Basically, everyone's like, okay, and because there's so many sets for one. But yeah, it's been super good and super fun so far.
Awesome. Okay. My last card is, again, from Adventures of the Forgotten Realms, and it's Eye of Vecna. 2-mana artifact, legendary artifact, although that doesn't matter for me.
Sure.
When it enters the battlefield, draw a card and lose 2 life. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2 mana. If you do, draw a card and lose 2 life. I'm currently trying this in 2 different decks. I have it in Dromoka, and I have it in my Brago deck. I think it's going to be fine in Brago. I think it's just going to be being a conscientious player and making sure I don't loop it if I somehow gain a bunch of, be able to loop the trigger a bunch of times, because I'll forget how many times I've done it and probably kill myself with this card. Where I hope it succeeds is in Dromoka, as that just kind of I don't really have anything planned to do this turn. I can spend 2 mana, draw a card, lose 2 life, swing away with something, gain that life back. I do also see it hitting that point in the deck, though, where I'm going to want to do a bunch of things in that turn. So I'm going to have to fight the greed of being you can still draw the card.
That was always the problem with, I think, Lifecrafters Bestiaries, where you have to decide, okay, do I want to do the things or do I want to spend the mana on drawing the card off the thing I just cast? If that's going to handicap me and hold me back from casting 2 spells or something. I didn't think of this in Dromoka, but that makes sense because the life loss hurts a lot less there.
Yeah, and it's just one kind of because I can't run Phyrexian Arena or anything like that. I think the closest thing I have in that deck to a somewhat consistent draw source is Toma Legends, and that's still conditional on casting my commander and swinging with my commander. So
I think the only time I've gotten this out is in my Reki deck, and it was in one of those turns where I'm going to cast this, and I'll draw 2 cards off of there when he comes into play because it's a legendary spell. So I'll spend 2 mana, draw 2 cards, and then it was one of those turns where I just cast 15 spells and dropped a Concordant Crossroads and killed everybody. So I didn't get much chance to see how well it performed over the course of a game. Ideally, I would have wanted to drop it on turn 4 or something after I played Reki and had it be out a few turns to see how often I wanted to use a draw, and I have not got a chance to do that yet, but I like the card quite a bit, so I'm glad you had good luck with it.
Yeah.
My last one is one that I think we even talked about it on our set review show, but I wanted to comment on it because it's another one of those cards that's done better than I thought it would be. And that's Thought Monitor. It's 6 and a blue for a 2/2 with affinity for artifacts and flying, and when it ETBs, draw 2 cards. I don't think this is only in one deck, and the reason it's not in my Vela deck as well is because just one of the stipulations in that deck is I only run colorless creatures. Otherwise, it would be in there. But in my equipment deck, it's just a 1 mana draw 2. That's amazing. And it leaves behind a 2/2 creature that can block. If you're playing an artifact deck at all, it's just free draw almost, or at least draw for 1 mana most of the time. And then you have something that you can attack with or block with that has flying. It is what it is. There's nothing about this card. Sometimes we're talking about cards and they're better than you think because you don't realize how useful the abilities are or whatever. This isn't that. It's obvious what it is. You looked at it and you think, oh yeah, I'm gonna try to cast it for a reduced cost and draw 2 cards. Maybe you'll blink it, whatever. That's obvious. But the things that are good, that are obviously good about it, are just better than you realized. That's what I found. I knew it was going to be that, and it's been better than I thought it was going to be at the things I knew it was going to do. It's just always 1 mana. It's just always useful to have that there as a 2/2 attacker or a blocker. I am super happy with this card, and I feel like if you are playing a blue artifact deck, it just should be in there. It's just so good.
Yeah, I definitely should probably try this in my side deck along with the draw spell you mentioned earlier today.
Reverse Engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you should. You'll be very, very happy with it. It just feels so good to draw 2 cards and play a 2/2 flyer for 1 blue mana. It just feels amazing. So yeah, highly recommend it. I've been delighted with that card, even though it wasn't really surprising at all. But yeah, super, super good. Okay, Max, I think that is going to wrap up our report card show with cards we've tried out this year and had good luck with. And I think this is something I definitely am going to come back to, and we always do a year-end show for our absolute bomb cards for the year that were the best of each category. But I think we'll revisit this maybe end of the year as well and do it again and talk about the impulsive pilferer level cards, that kind of thing that we tried that are never going to be the card of the year, but are worth talking about because they're super good. So this is the kind of thing we'll definitely come back to and do again down the road. So, all right, that will wrap up episode 285. Thank you to our show editor, Rafael Garcia. You can find him on Twitter at Ursa Bearwalker. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. I am Dana. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max, and you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. We'll be back next week. Until then, I am Dana.
And I'm Max.